Okay, this is the Building Energy Performance Standard Task Force meeting from May 9, 2023, starting at 2:30 p.m. My name is Ike and I work for the Department of Energy and Environment. This meeting is being recorded and the slides and recording will be posted to our website after the event. First of all, a WebEx tour. If you need to adjust audio visual, click on the audio and visual to adjust those settings. Along the bottom of the bar are buttons to mute and unmute yourself, start and stop your video, send emojis. The three dots down there are another way to access settings, and the red X is how you leave the meeting. At the bottom right is where you can access the list of participants in meeting chat, and all are encouraged to participate in the chat. So to go over the online meeting etiquette, to repeat again, the meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the website. All attendees will control their own mute function, but could be muted by the facilitator due to background noise. Task force members can comment at any time. We do ask the non-task force members to please use the chat box to request to talk. At this time, I will ask the non-task force members to please use the chat box to register your name, organization, and email to sign in. And for the task force members, I'll go ahead and do a roll call right now. Starting with Katie Bergfeld.
Here.
Patty Boyd.
Present.
Jen Croft.
Here.
Marshall Dewar-Balkand.
Present.
Any representative from DEMPED?
Hello, Olivia Jovine.
Thank you. Any representative from the Department of Buildings? Okay. David Good.
Present.
Adrian Gross. Resh Mahala.
Present.
Jessica Jones.
Here.
Monica Landrino.
Here.
Cliff Majersic.
Here.
Todd Nedwick.
Here.
Joe Riley.
Here.
Jay Wilson.
Here.
You have quorum. Okay, so the role of the task force is to advise the Department of Energy and Environment on creation of an implementation plan for the Building Energy Performance Program, to recommend amendments to proposed regulations issued by DOEE, and to recommend complementary programs or policies. This is our agenda for today. First, we'll review the administrative items and then program updates. We'll go into a report on the BEPS program status. We'll talk through BEPS program updates, and then we have an exemption request to review based on separate ownership within a building. We'll discuss the next meeting and next steps, and then finish up with announcements. So for the BEPS program status, I will turn it over to Katie Bergfeld.
Hi everyone. So I hope y'all can hear me. Sorry, I got to turn on the echo. Ike and I are in the same room. Okay, we're good now. Are we good?
No, I can't turn it off.
Yep.
All right, we got it figured out. Can everybody hear me now? Yes. Okay, I'm just gonna talk and hope everyone can hear me.
We can hear you.
Joe's smiling, so I think you all can hear me. Okay, so we're gonna start off the meeting today by giving programmatic updates, status updates of where we are with the current program. And as Ike mentioned, then we're going to launch into talking a little bit about some of the challenges that are facing the building industry and potential updates that we could discuss about the program that we have discussed in the past. just to give you all a broad overview, so we had two major, like, we had one reporting deadline, but two major things were due on that date. One was the benchmarking reports, so the annual benchmarking reports. Again, we cover buildings 25,000 square feet and above. All of that was due to us. Calendar year 22 data was due to us by April 3rd. And then on that exact same day was the day that buildings had to select their BEPS pathway. So buildings had to indicate, buildings that are 50,000 square feet and above that did not meet the BEPS were required to select a pathway and tell DOE how they were going to comply. I am extremely, extremely proud and happy with the results that we got on those deadlines. I'm really, really proud of all the work that my team is doing, and I'm really, really happy with all the partnerships that we've built with all of you to help us get to these numbers. But for benchmarking, we're at 85% submission rate, which is really, really good for this point in the year. I want to note that this year when we disclose the data, this will be the first year of public disclosure for the buildings 25 to 50,000 square feet. So this will be the first year that those buildings data is going to be public. So that's one flag for everybody. We are right now with the benchmarking side of things, we are reviewing all of that data. We are looking at the data quality. I think many of you on the line have had experience with our building performance help desk. So folks are reviewing that data. Some of it gets automatically flagged and you get an email and then you have to respond to that email. So our team basically touches almost every single report at least once. So that's what's going on with benchmarking right now. With BEPS, for this being a new program, the fact that we had 80% of buildings choose a pathway is actually really, really impressive. So there's about 930 buildings that were required to select a pathway. 740 have selected a pathway at this point, which is just at 80% overall. To give you a breakdown of the actual pathway selections of where people are leaning, over 90% of submissions are either for the performance or standard target pathway, and it's pretty evenly split between those two. So about half of that 90% chose performance, about half chose standard target pathway. I think a little bit more chose performance pathway, but I can check the numbers if anyone wants the actual numbers. There were about 20 prescriptive pathway submissions, and then there were about 40 alternative compliance pathway submissions. 6 have been approved at this point. And then overall, we are literally going through every single one of those 740 and approving them. There's just a different process for approving them based on what pathway it is. At this point, we have approved over 250 pathway selections, which again, I don't think you all understand, but that's like a huge amount of work. So my team is doing a lot of work right now. We are making our way through these. We have gone through as a team and prioritized sort of which ones we had to kind of kick back right away because they didn't have the basic requirements. For example, if we got a prescriptive pathway submission, but there was no energy audit submitted, we kind of just kicked it back right away. And then anything that was primed and being ready for approval, we have been getting through them as quickly as possible. I want everyone to note that these pathway selection numbers, so note that the submission numbers are not necessarily a one-to-one comparison to like the number of properties with a pathway submitted. So sometimes we get a pathway submission that actually represents multiple buildings because they're either tied by a meter or, for example, they're a campus, or we got a portfolio-wide approach, ACP. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. I'm going to stop there and see if anybody has questions.
Katie, can you tell us a little bit about the alternative compliance pathway submissions, if there are any common themes that are recurring in those, and then just the ones that aren't yet approved, is that because you haven't gone to them yet, or you've kicked them back to the folks who submitted them for more information?
Yeah, I can answer the second question. I'm going to hand it to Ike because he's looked through most of them, I think. So for those of you who don't know Ike, he's one of our technical compliance leads, and he's been taking the lead on a lot of the ACP's portion. So in terms of your second question, Annika, of like, we just haven't gotten to all of them. So we are still, again, we had to kind of prioritize, and we just haven't gotten to all of them. So that's why there's only been 6 approved so far. I do want to state that of the ones that we received, we had pretty much had a conversation with most of the folks.
That's amazing.
Yeah. yeah, for the custom ACPs that had come in, we had talked to a lot of folks. So we knew they were coming. And so some of them we were able to turn around a little bit quicker, or some of them were less complex. But I'm going to hand it over to Ike to give a little bit more context.
Sure. Yeah. So, and for the ACP selections that we've received, I would group them into three major groups. Let me say four major groups. So, the largest grouping is probably the new construction ACP, and the vast majority of these buildings have actually been opting to use the calendar year 2021 compliance option. So they've been submitting with that third-party verification reports, and so we've been reviewing those and checking to make sure that they've met the BEPS in that 2021 report. The second group is baseline adjustments. And the majority of the baseline adjustments that we've received so far are requesting baseline shifts due to inaccurate data. So this was a new circumstance that we added due to feedback we had received through our help desk about how do building owners address issues when the baseline years that they would otherwise normally use in the performance pathway have some issues with it. So we added that circumstance, and many buildings are using that. But there are also other baseline shifts for other circumstances that we are still working through. And then the last one, the last group that constitutes a lot of tickets are for extended deep energy retrofits, and the majority of those are coming through the retrofit accelerator program. So we worked with the administrators of that program to outline a path through our technical assistance portion of the program, and put together a template EDER milestone proposal that they could use that aligned very well with the aspects of that program. And then lastly, the custom ACPs, as Katie mentioned, we had a conversation with almost every building that has submitted a complete application there. We have portfolio approaches as we had reviewed with the task force for the buildings under the Department of General Services review. We've also had conversations with the DC Housing Authority and the DC Public Libraries, who are taking a similar approach, i.e. a portfolio approach for their buildings. So those three tickets don't constitute a large number of the tickets, but they do constitute a large number of the buildings that do not meet the BEPS. And then lastly, we do have another custom ACP proposal for a building that has issues such as split ownership and as well as high intensity uses that is still under review. So for the 40 ACP submissions we have at this point, we have rejected a few, but only for incomplete submissions that basically were submitted without a plan. And we're working simultaneously on reviewing those submissions, as well as making sure that any agreements that we put together to finalize those pathways have those agreements approved by our lawyers. So that's its own process that a little bit insider baseball, but also takes some time. So that's partially why those have kind of not been pushed through as fast as some of the others, but we're not seeing any particular trends about incomplete or ACP proposals that we're rejecting, other than the ones that simply did not come with the minimum proposal requirements that were outlined in our guidebook.
Go on, Annika.
I was gonna say, did you have any extended, I know there was already an automatic delay of compliance for COVID. Were there any extended delays of compliance due to high vacancy rates that were submitted?
And any delays of compliance?
We have had a few delays of compliance, not for, trying to think if we've had, I haven't pulled the numbers on that. The delays of compliance we've approved are for the ones that are pending demolition at this time.
Okay.
I think working with a lot of the building owners, they've gotten to the point where they were comfortable enough selecting a pathway, even if they've had vacancy issues. But obviously, we have had conversations about what their options will be if they have a change of property use in the future, or if they have continuing vacancy issues towards the end of the cycle. They could request a delay at that time.
Yeah, Annika, we also had one building owner who's in a very unique circumstance that reached out to me that is a deeply affordable property that wanted a delay of compliance because they're kind of demolishing the building in phases. It's a property of like, it's kind of garden style, but they're tied to a meter, so they are treated as one building. And they're kind of demolishing it in phases and building in phases. And we came to the conclusion, we talked to them and came to the conclusion that was more appropriate for them to do the extended deep energy retrofit pathway rather than a extended delay of compliance. So a lot of times when we talk to building owners, we just offer them a lot of different options, and then they're able to kind of pick and choose what makes the most sense for them.
So, so in terms of exemptions or delays of compliance due to high vacancy numbers, you have none or just not a very high number?
Not, yeah, I think none at
Yeah.
this point.
None.
I
Okay.
don't think we've received any, Annika. Not
Okay. And then one other question about the portfolio approach. Are the only applicants DC entities or agencies, or none from the private sector?
Correct.
Correct.
So, follow up on that. This is all really helpful information. Am I hearing correctly? There have not yet been any sort of custom ACPs, like people proposing alternative compliance pathways that weren't one of the, except for the portfolio, which we kind of knew was coming from the DC agencies, but we haven't seen any other sort of custom pathways that weren't previously articulated, but might be setting a precedent. Because I think we had discussed a potential role for the task force if there were going to be other custom ACPs that then were sort of precedent setting of being able to be involved in that. I hadn't heard anything, so I just wanted to confirm.
We got one. Are you talking about the one that we're basically talking about today? Like,
It's in a related.
yeah,
audience,
so we
yes.
got
Okay.
one.
We can table it then.
Yeah, we got one. So we're going to talk later about the concept of a commercial building that has different parts of the building that are owned by completely separate entities. And we've gotten several requests about what do we do. One of them was a custom ACP proposal. The one we're talking about today was actually an exemption request. So we're going to talk through the exemption request, and then we'll see kind of where that conversation goes and how that could apply to the custom ACP proposal that we received as well. And then we can also provide that information to the task force as well if we feel like there is some sort of precedent setting decision that gets made in that conversation, if that makes sense. So that's the only one we've received.
Actually, sorry, there was one more also from a DC entity. It wasn't a portfolio approach, but it was addressing unusual building uses that weren't separately metered, and how to address that moving forward. So we're still working on that one with them.
So I just want to point out too that the thing that I didn't recognize either is the fact that our data management system, BEAM, that's our platform that we use, is relatively new. But the fact that we're able to give you all of these stats shows you that that platform is working pretty well. I was pretty impressed with how seamless it was. Again, it's a new platform, and you never know what's going to happen with software. So again, kudos to my team that's been working on the development of that. It's been going pretty well. I think we've had minimal issues with that. And so the fact that we're able to give you these numbers so quickly, I think is a testament to like that program seems to be working pretty well too.
Yeah.
Any other questions that folks have?
Yeah,
I think I'll do our best to answer them.
I'm just curious if you've been able to draw any conclusions about the 20% who haven't submitted a pathway yet. Like, is there any sort of commonalities there in terms of property type or location or anything?
Yeah, next couple slides, Todd, I'm going to go over submission by property type and then submission by ward. So there's some, we can see that data. We can't necessarily draw out what the patterns are. I can state up front that with benchmarking, we often have trouble with the condominium, the residential condominiums and co-ops. So we are definitely going to try to work really hard with our partners to reach out to those building owners. So that is probably part of it, but I will show you that we have a pretty high submission rate for multifamily overall, and we have a very high submission rate for commercial office buildings. But we can go to the next slide and I'll show you. So this is by property type. You'll see in the middle column So again, remember that expected pathways is not always going to necessarily match, like the numbers aren't going to necessarily always match up on because a submission doesn't necessarily equal a building. So the middle column shows you like the number of pathways we expect. So that's sort of like the number of buildings that we expect to have to select a pathway in that group. And then on the right-hand side, we'll show you the submission rates. So multifamily and office are at 82 and 91% respectively. So that very successful. Again, we are only a month past the deadline. So for a new program. K through 12 schools were at 86%. A big majority of the that haven't submitted are privately owned buildings, privately owned K through 12 schools. So DGS has submitted their plan to DOE for their schools. So they are included in all these numbers. Hotels are at 79%. Other property type includes all different kinds of properties that this slide just includes that like highest number of buildings that we have, and then some of the ones that we did specific outreach to. So some of the places that we definitely need to do some work are with senior living communities, worship facilities, and then hospital campuses. And those, I pointed those out on this slide specifically because we have done specific outreach to those buildings. DOE did some, and then the Building Innovation Hub actually ran a program called Success with BEPS, where they were reaching out to senior living communities and worship facilities. The good news is that, 40% of 5 means that we only have 3 more that we need to get in touch with, right? And same with senior living community, right? So the ones that we are not doing so great with is a small number of buildings that we can maybe do some one-on-one outreach with. So that's the good news. With these larger building types, like multifamily office, those seem to be doing the best, but obviously we still have some work to do. So I'll talk in a minute about what our outreach plans are. And if you all on the line have any ideas, I'm happy to hear those. If you want to go next slide. So this shows you by ward.
Just a quick question on the hospital campuses. Can we assume that the hospitals associated with universities are part of that 100% compliance?
No, not necessarily, because Georgetown, for example, Georgetown's hospital is owned by MedStar. So
Okay.
Georgetown doesn't include that in their campus necessarily. Okay. So I'd have to go back and see which of the 2 did not submit. Maybe somebody on my team on the line knows, but yeah, so not necessarily.
Okay.
But oh yeah, I want to call out college and universities because they have a 100% compliance rate. So congratulations, Dave. Good. I know you're on the line, and I see that GW is on the line. I didn't see if anybody else was, but that was amazing. You all are doing great. Special call out. Okay, next slide. So this is by ward. So you can see the highest ward compliance rate is Ward 2. The lowest is Ward 5. The only reason I am presenting this because I was asked to pull these numbers from the mayor's office. So I figured I'd just show it to y'all as well. You can see that across the board, all wards are showing a majority of buildings submitting. So there's nobody that's like way, way, way far behind. But you can see that Ward 5 is, a little bit further behind than Ward 2. Well, not a little bit, quite a bit further behind than Ward 2. And that the other thing I want to point out is the wards that have the highest number of buildings seem to be performing the best in terms of submitting the data to us. So again, I'll talk a little bit about our outreach plan in a minute, but it does involve potentially reaching out to council members and showing them, here's some of the buildings that failed to do this. Could you help us reach out to them? You can go to the next slide. So next steps. I think most of you know this, but we really, really tried to focus on compliance assistance as much as possible before we moved to enforcement. So the first thing that we did on around April 19th, we sent an email warning out to all the buildings. And we said, hey, there was a deadline, you missed it. You have till May 15th before we will take any enforcement action. Please go ahead and submit this. I want to mention that leading up to the deadline, we were hosting webinars twice a week that were just focused on how do I select a pathway. So we did that every week in March, and then we continued it in April. So that's some of the compliance assistance we offered. It was literally you log on, somebody shows you how to select the pathway, and then you log off or you can ask questions. So we were doing that twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. So we sent an email warning out. The Hub, who I see a bunch of their folks are on the line here, the Hub has offered to reach out to nearly all of the 200 buildings and try to get in touch with them to help explain what they need to do and to help the building owners understand what the requirement is and know where to click the button, essentially. And then we've also been doing a lot of work with our bids. Antonio on my team hosted over 20 trainings he got in touch with every bid across the district. Most of the trainings we held were with the downtown bid, the Golden Triangle bid. We did a couple with the Southwest bid, and then also I think we did a virtual one with the NOMA bid. So we've hosted over 20 trainings with the bids. So we're going to reach back out to the bids and kind of tell them like, hey, here's some of the buildings in your bid that missed this deadline. Can you help us get in touch with them? And then the last other piece that we're probably going to utilize leading up to the deadline, I offered to brief every council member on the BEPS program. I got uptake from about 6 or 7 of them, and most of their staff were very engaged. And I asked them, hey, if I send you a list of the buildings after the deadline, could you help us maybe get in touch with some of them? And they said yes. So we're going to reach back out to council member staff and again, just provide them a list and say, here's all the buildings in Ward 3 that missed this, or Ward 5, whatever. Do you know anybody of these buildings that can help us? So that's our first sort of plan of attack is outreach and compliance assistance. Then we will be moving on to enforcement, but I want to note the dates here. We're going to be giving people a lot of grace and a lot of leeway. But I want to restate that the point of us having these civil infractions is so that people avoid millions of dollars down the line later on, right? So we'd rather be sending out a smaller fine now and getting your attention than in 3-4 years, you're getting this huge penalty, right? So in late May, we are going to send what we call enforcement notices that will have an associated $1,000 fine tied to them. But what we're going to state on that fine is as long as you comply within the next 30 days, so by the end of late June, we will waive the fine completely. So as long as we get a pathway selection by the end of June, you're good to go. And then even after that point, building owners have the ability to reach out to DOE and ask for a reduction in the fine or ask us to waive the fine. And so that's a process that we can work out with the building owner. Then once we get to late June, early July, we are going to issue what we call notices of infraction. What that means is that it's no longer going to be handled with DOE directly. We're going to issue a notice of infraction, and then that will have to be adjudicated with the Office of Administrative Hearings. So we're going to do everything we can to not get to that point with anyone. But that is our plan. Any questions?
Questions. If a building owner, let's say a building owner you were in touch with, they want to select they're like, oh, we meant to select a pathway, we didn't even know about this thing somehow, and we want to select a pathway, but we're thinking about a pathway such as the prescriptive pathway where there's more requirements in order to select it, and we don't have time, and 30 days isn't enough time for us. I mean, 30 days should be enough time for someone to select the performance or standard target, but might not be enough for someone to select prescriptive, certainly not enough if they want to submit an ACP. If you're in a conversation with them about that, I assume there could be further grace that would be extended instead of going to the notices right to the notice of infraction by late June. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. I
mean, obviously you have to consider that further, but I just wanted to offer that I feel like that would be a good thing to do.
Yeah, I've guided a couple people on this and told them they can always change their pathway. So they might want to go ahead and click the button. And then if they feel like they need to change that later on, they can always talk to DOE about that later on and try to change it. But we do need to see effort, right? We need to see that somebody is actually trying to comply. It's the same thing I used to say with the benchmarking program. Like, your data might not be perfect on April 3rd, but you should submit something so that DOE knows that you are putting an effort. I'll say specifically with the prescriptive pathway, Marshall, we have talked as a team. Ike, you can feel free to correct me when I say this, but we've talked as a team. We will be somewhat lenient in accepting prescriptive pathway selections or audits later than the deadline, but we are going to have some stipulations that we need to see some progress on the action plan already happening. because what we don't want is somebody coming to us in March of next year and saying, well, I want the prescriptive pathway, and they haven't done an audit and they're not on the right track and they haven't even started their action plan. So the action plan actually next year is going to be more of the harder deadline that we're aiming for. And if someone's coming to us late for prescriptive pathway, we're just going to tell them we need to see progress on the next milestone. We need to see that you've done something, you've done some thinking on this, so that we can make sure you are on the right track for this pathway and you will be successful. But we will show as much grace as we can on that.
I have a question, I guess, for the ownership community. I think that the level of compliance, demonstrates a pretty good level of engagement. So I commend everyone at DOEE for all of the outreach you've been doing. And also, I know the hub has been a big part of the outreach as well. But for those on the call, both on the task force and from the public who are in the ownership side, I would love to hear feedback. Do you feel like the level of outreach has been effective, that you've heard and from your DOE or other stakeholders when needed, or had access to resources when needed? I think it'd be helpful to get some feedback, if anyone's willing to provide that comment.
Oh, I would say the level of support from DOE has been amazing. Like instant responses, and like technical people that know what they're talking about. So like, not only fast, but also high quality response. You wish, people like that worked at Petco, right? And, other places. But the resources have been great. And I'm pretty invested, but it's hard, like the outreach, I think it's been persistent and consistent through, I remember in the height of COVID, a BEPS panel in, Gensler space, right? Like they never missed a beat. And, I think the outreach and support has been excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're another agency, but I would echo that. We always have support when we need it.
I did have a question about some of the building types that were on lower in compliance, like hospitals, senior living, houses of worship. I'd heard somebody mention that some of those might get, like houses of worship or nonprofits might get picked up by the accelerator. Are there any specifics that you guys can offer about what types of programs might help engage those different building types?
Yeah, why don't you go to the next slide? Because I talked about the accelerator a little bit, Annika, and then, oh no, I don't. I thought I had an accelerator slide.
I thought you did too.
Where'd it go? Sorry, we're out of order. We'll go back. So let's jump to the accelerator, because Todd had also asked for a specific update on the accelerator. And then I can answer your question, Annika. So the Affordable Housing Retrofit Accelerator status update right now. Progress thus far, DCSEU. So we're working with two partners on this, DCSEU and DC Green Bank. And DCSEU has hired subcontractors to perform energy audits in every single building. So every building that joins the accelerator is given a free energy audit through the program. And so DCSEU has completed over 45 energy audit walkthroughs. And then what happens is the audit walkthrough happens, and then all the audits get run through DOEE kind of for approval. So our technical team is taking a look at it, making sure that it meets ASHRAE level 2 standards. As much as possible, we're making sure that those measures seem to make sense. And so 30 of those have been approved by DOEE. And then there's been one incentive agreement. So an incentive agreement means that the building owner has essentially signed a contract with DCSEU saying these measures are going to be installed in my building. So that is where we're at right now. And we are working to get as many incentive agreements done as possible, because some of the challenges that we're facing is that I think you all understand this, because we've had this issue with the SEU contract in the past when it wasn't a multi-year contract, is that retrofits can span fiscal years. However, the money doesn't span fiscal years. So we're trying to spend as much money, we're trying to do as much possible right now. And we're trying to spend as much as we can, but as you all know, retrofits can take time. And sometimes, so what we're trying to do right now is figure out what are some of the retrofits we can get done by the end of this fiscal year and spend this money, and then figure out what we can do in FY24 for any of the measures that we want to continue on with, or if there's other measures in the buildings that need to get done, we're trying to figure out where we can plug that money in. And so that gets to the second point, is that even right now, if we have unspent FY23 funding, we are not guaranteed that that will be carried over into FY24. So not only do we not have FY24 ARPA funding, we also don't have a guarantee that the FY23 funds will carry over. So both of those are challenges that we're facing and that we are trying to address currently. What happens after the building owner gets the audit walkthrough is they sit down with the SCU and the Green Bank, and they walk through the audit results. And they talk about what are the measures that make sense to do in this building. It's ultimately up to the building owner to select what's going to be done in their building. But we show them the financials and the savings associated with it. And then the SCU kind of talks through what we can provide through direct funding. And then the Green Bank talks about anything that can't be provided through direct funding, talks to them about, what are some loan products that are available to that building owner. So Annika, the Affordable Housing Retrofit Accelerator is primarily focused on affordable housing buildings. So the affordable housing buildings get that full gamut of services. They get the audit, they get the sit down with SEU, they get and all of that, and then they get the funding of the measures. The senior care community and worship facilities, unfortunately, we didn't have enough funding to support that full gamut of services for those properties. So what we did is we offered them a free energy audit. So all those buildings that participated got the free energy audit. And then we also did a program with the hub, where the hub did some specific outreach to those buildings to sort of just talk through what BEPS is, what they need to do, and those kinds of things. If we did have additional funding, we could give them the full gamut of services as well.
I have a thank you very much. It's good to know that it's kind of accelerator light, but there are some programs have been set up to help building types that might be struggling. I guess I have two more questions to follow on. And one, could you clarify why funds left over at the end of fiscal year wouldn't carry over into fiscal year 24 from 23? And if there's some kind of legal barrier to that, would it be possible to set up like an escrow account or something, maybe leverage the Green Bank to hold those funds for designees until the retrofits are complete?
Yeah, so the carryover funding is decided by people higher than us. So that's decided primarily, I believe, by the mayor's office of what's going to be done with any leftover ARPA funding and where that money should go. I will state this: we did get the FY22 carryover, so we had some carryover funds from FY22 that we were able to apply to FY23. So we may get the FY23 funding, but it's not guaranteed. So that makes it somewhat difficult for us to make long-term decisions when the funding is not guaranteed. We don't know as of September 30th if we're going to be able to, fund X, Y, and Z. And then the other issue is that the way that the incentive agreements work through SEU is that they, and Patty, I think you're on the line, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but incentive agreements have to have an end date of the end of this fiscal year with the accelerator at least. They have to have an end date of the end of the fiscal year. And so we can't have an incentive agreement that stretches past September 30th either. So that's a bit of a constraint that we're working with as well.
That's correct for everything with the DCSU. We're only on a year-to-year promised funding schedule.
Patty, can I ask a question about that? Because this don't mean to get a total side note into SCU matters, but the whole point of moving the SCU to a multi-year contract was to allow such things to carry over from year to year. So I don't quite follow how you're not able to make those kinds of agreements if there's, guaranteed. I guess it's the question of funding, core funding versus this rollover funding or this additional funding. Is that the problem?
I guess even the core funding may not be available. It's all in the mayor's budget. The budget has to be approved. It has been every time approved, but there's never a promise.
Okay.
So would it,
like, for example, Marshall, the FY24 budget hasn't been voted on, right? So we don't have a final budget for FY24.
Yeah.
would it be helpful for private sector members of the task force to send any letters of advocacy around rolling over the FY23 funds to FY24 or in any other ways, just to make sure that we get some continuity and consistency in our retrofit accelerator for affordable housing?
Yeah, I'm sure that would be helpful.
And if
I
folks,
think some folks talked about it in their testimony
Yeah.
in the budget oversight hearing, if I remember
Mhm.
correctly as well.
for just in transparency for folks, I testified at that hearing. I believe Cliff on the line did as well. A couple other folks as well, but yeah, spoke about this. But if folks want to send follow-up letters, yeah, from the 5 executive members of the task force, follow up with Annika and I. We can
Yeah,
talk
yeah. I was
offline.
gonna say, Marshall, if you don't mind, I know you have written something about this already. If folks could reach out to you too.
Yeah,
about it.
please do.
No, I think I sort of playing devil's advocate here. Sorry, there's a bit of an echo. I do think it's really critical. We're the first jurisdiction that I know of to have created a program like this to address affordable housing. I think a lot of other communities are looking to us to see how we are supporting our low-income households through this type of program, addressing equity and climate and resiliency. So I would, I'd love to see it succeed, and I know that continuity of funding is a big part of that success. So I think if anyone does have interest in signing on to a letter of advocacy, that would be welcome.
This is Cliff. I just want to echo Annika. I presented last week to 27 governor's offices at a White House meeting on building performance standards. And a lot of them are looking at passing their own BEPS. A few of them are already part of the BEPS, the President Biden's BEPS National BEPS Coalition, and a couple of them have bills. And this was a big topic. How do you support affordable housing? And I actually held up DC's support for affordable housing as a good model. So it would be a real tragedy to lose that model, which is so important for equity and fairness.
Thank you, Cliff. Okay. In interest of time, can you go back to the other thing that we'd asked to give an update on were the amendments that were introduced to the Budget Support Act. So there were amendments that were introduced in the mayor's FY24 budget proposal. I think most people on the line know about this, but just I've provided some links here if you want to read what was proposed. But basically the basic premise was that it would delay BEPS by 3 years, including the first date. So it would delay the 2021 BEPS to 2024. The budget oversight. So then there was a budget oversight hearing held on April 6th. I put a link to the recording if anybody wants to watch it. Several of you on the line testified, I know, at that hearing. And so then what happens with the budget, y'all, is that there's these budget oversight hearings that are held through committees. The committee that oversees DOEE is called the Transportation and Environment Committee, which is overseen by Councilmember Allen. So the committee report, so basically then the committee puts out a report based on what happens in the budget oversight hearing, and they put out a list of recommendations. So their list of recommendations was published. I put a link in the slides to that report. It was published on April 27th. The big things to note were that they recommended striking the subtitle that would delay BEPS. So the Transportation and Environment Committee recommends that we don't delay the program. And then they also recommend, this is tangentially related to what we do, but they recommended an increase to the Sustainable Energy Trust Fund starting in FY24. And I put the numbers, I quoted the numbers from their report here for you. You can go to the next slide, Ike. And so then what happened after that is Mayor Bowser then drafted a letter to council that was released on May 3rd. Yeah, May 3rd. That's 5 is May 3rd. And the letter basically, again, reiterates and supports the delay. I've put some quotes in here to talk about, what the mayor had put in that letter. So the letter supports the delay and then also opposes those SETF increases. And I pulled direct quotes from that letter. And just FYI, next steps that council will likely vote on the FY24 budget in the coming weeks. So it still remains to be seen. So the recommendation from the committee was to strike the subtitle, but this still has to be voted on by the council overall. So it remains to be seen what will happen. Oh, and I want to mention that there's a hearing today on the Healthy Homes Act, which was also introduced by Councilmember Allen, that is that includes those SETF increases, as well as some provisions for standing up a program related to the Inflation Reduction Act rebate program that will be handed down very soon to states, which DC is included in. So that is happening right now today. But this is the ones that are most germane to BEPS. So I'm going to stop there.
Marshall, looks like you have your hand raised.
Yeah, just a couple points of chiming in. So as I mentioned, yeah, I spoke in this hearing. Annika co-signed that testimony. I was glad to see what that the report from the committee recommended not delaying this. I think one thing I said in this testimony, which we'll come back to, I think a bit at the end of this meeting, is that I think there are clearly places where this the BEPS program could be improved, and I think this task force is a natural place to have those conversations. So we'll be able to continue talking about that. If folk would like to probably send a follow-up letter to council after the mayor's letter here. If folks want to sign on to that, we can follow up offline about that. I will point out that it appears maybe it was a clerical error, but there are some factual inaccuracies in the mayor's letter, including statements around compliance rates at Ward 7 and 8, which we saw Katie presenting earlier. So, Annika, I don't know if you have more to add to this.
It's my understanding that delaying the BEPS program would also reset the baseline and reset it to a time period when most of our, for example, most of our commercial office buildings were largely vacant due to the pandemic. So it would actually make it harder for building owners to comply now that these buildings are becoming reoccupied. Is that?
That's correct. That's it's a very simple amendment, and it says that it just pushes the timeframes out. It says the standards need to be set by a date, which could be read as saying even the standards need to be reset, though they have already been set prior to the date. So that's not to say. But the law, in the way it's written, sets the baseline in a separate part of the law. Says the baseline will be the average of the 2 years prior. So without addressing that, it does force the baseline to be recalculated on a period inclusive of pandemic impacts, which would actually, I think, make it harder for many building owners to comply. This was a point I made in my testimony. Others did. The council report also referenced that, which I was glad to see. But this is a serious problem here. I think, just to pine on this, I mean, I think, as I said in the testimony, I think that there are ways to address the impacts of the pandemic and to further try to have the BEPS better address that. And, very interested in hearing from folks in the task force, now or at a later point about that. But I continue to think that this amendment is the wrong way to go on this.
Well, I particularly think if DOE hasn't received any requests for delays of compliance or exemption requests due to high vacancy levels, not a single one, then it seems to me that if that's the justification for the delay, there's some kind of incongruence here.
Agreed.
Just in the interest of time, I do see 2 hands raised. Jay Wilson, you can go first, and then Joe Riley, and then maybe after those 2 questions, we can hopefully move on to the next item.
That sounds good.
Go ahead, Jay.
Just a quick question: that is the mayor's delay or proposed delay tied to any budget issues? So, meaning if this passes, is any of the funding that was supposed to go to the SEU or the Green Bank or others stripped away as part of that delay?
Jay,
I'm not.
Jay, did you ask a question? Sorry, your audio went out.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. So is the delay tied to any budget issue? So if the delay moves forward, is there money that would be stripped from the SEU or the Green Bank or DOE to administer the program associated with that delay?
As far as I know, no.
Okay.
But the delay would necessarily have a budget impact in the because there would be additional work that DOE would have to do in order to address that. So there's, that fiscal impact hasn't been written, but
it could also have a fiscal impact on some of the agencies that need to.
Very much so.
To comply. So there's, I don't know if we want to get into that, but okay. Thank you, Katie and Marshall.
Joe.
I just thought, I would share an opinion that Annika posed the question, why, if no one's requesting an extension or delay, why would the mayor's proposal here be helpful, right? And I think part of the answer is the delay kind of isn't that helpful, right? Because you just end up kind of being in 2 compliance periods at the same time at the end of it, right? Which is a kind of a scary proposition. So, you know, like I don't know that it's, but I think more to the point and why the mayor proposed it is just because the building industry is getting crushed, right? We're looking at a building down the street that's for sale. It's up for sale for like $19 million. Last time we put in a bid for it was a couple years ago. It was for 50 million, right? So like the building's lost $30 million of value. You know, it's right in the heart of the city here. It's a nice building. It hasn't been poorly managed or, you know, it's a good owner. It's just that's the state of the industry. And so I think that's why the mayor proposed it. It has nothing to do really with BEPS. It has to do with, you know, the building industry that BEPS implicates.
Thanks for that perspective, Joe. We're going to talk more about that in our next topic too. So
it just seems like the wrong Band-Aid maybe for the problem. That I think there are fixes, but that might not be the right one.
In interest of time, we're going to move on to the next topic, and it'll dovetail very nicely into what you were just talking about, Joe. And so with the next topic is talking about, you know, as Marshall mentioned, and we've talked about in the past, that we do feel like, you know, there are some challenges facing the building industry right now, A, and B, there are some fixes that we had talked about, you know, as a task force wanting in the program before we even knew that there was going to be a pandemic and a public health emergency and, you know, the current market conditions. So these are just some things that I put up that kind of I had thought of that we've heard from the building industry of what's going on right now. And I'm going to pause and see if there's anything we want to add to this. But some of the current market conditions and challenges that we're hearing about are very high vacancy rates, particularly in the commercial office building. And from what I've heard in talking with AOBA, this is not just Class B and C office buildings. These are Class A office buildings that are also having this problem. Access to funding and financing is more challenging nowadays, or I don't know if it's the access or if it's just the terms aren't as attractive. I don't know. I'm sure you commercial building owners can tell me. Difficulty engaging with tenants, particularly non-residential tenants, and getting them sort of to buy into the fact that the building has to meet these requirements. And then the mayor's office has released a plan to help rebuild downtown. And there's a lot of office and multifamily conversions that are going to be going on. And this isn't necessarily, this is a really good thing. You know, it's going to be great in rebuilding downtown. But it does present a challenge in terms of how does that intersect with BEPS, right? So how does a building that's going from office to multifamily, how does BEPS sort of apply to that property type? And we've had a couple conversations with developers that are doing these conversions. And we've also had conversations with the Deputy Mayor of Planning and Economic Development, so DemPed's office. Olivia is on the line today. So we talked to DemPed's office about that plan and how that intersects with BEPS as well. So if anybody else has anything that I think I'm missing from this slide, please let me know. I think it's important to talk about the context and like what we're talking about and what these challenges are.
Something that I would add with regard to high vacancy rates is that we're not always talking about leased vacancy rates. Like most of the time, the issue is that people aren't going back to the office. So while there's still about 20% vacancy across the office market in DC, it's more so that the space that is leased is only 40 to 50% occupied. So there's definitely an economic development consideration here, but it's also trying to right size what these spaces are and how these offices are used. Something that our team is advocating for is using this time to rebuild spaces and renovate them to reattract people back into the office. So making these spaces healthy and energy efficient is going to create office spaces where people want to go back to the office. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity to talk about mutual benefits from BEPS and rebuilding a downtown core.
Thanks, Jay.
I would be curious from any of the building ownership community if there's any workforce challenges, if anyone's having a hard time getting the necessary personnel or teams that you need to do the work to comply with BEPS.
It's more just bandwidth, I think, Annika. You know, like I loved when Ike was giving his update, you know, on like, you know, the ACPs and everything. It was all very factual and true, right? But like the to get from A to B to C, you know, and just like, you know, you get the email back from DOE and you kind of go back and forth. It's a lot of work, and like you can't subcontract your way through it. It's like, you know, like I could, you know, I can have, you know, OTJ or, you know, HOK or GHT or, you know, any three letters you want on it, you know, like it's a lot of, you know, building, it's stuff that only the building manager and the engineer, you know, can really answer. And it's super, like it's been a, you know, we've been benchmarking buildings in Energy Star since 1999, you know, and it's never been like this before, right? You know, it's never been this high stakes. It's never been this exacting. It's like if I change a GFA by 1 square foot, like I'm going back 5 years to even before we owned the building and trying to recreate an Energy Star. Like that is hard to do. It takes a lot of work. And I can't outsource it. Like nobody can do it, right? You know, it's just labor intensive. I don't know that it's a workforce challenge, but it's just burdensome.
Well, I asked just because I know the issue had come up in the past. If all of these building owners have to do all this work at the same time, would we have sufficient workforce to get it done? And so it's helpful to hear that that's not at least a challenge you've encountered. I don't know if anyone else has, but to date, if you've had no problem finding, you know, the people to do the work, it's just your own bandwidth that might be maxed out. But yeah, I just want to know if that was a current market challenge or if the market has sufficient labor to help meet the need.
I will say on that note, Annika, I'm not a commercial building owner, obviously, but we have talked to a lot of service providers, and we, it's kind of similar. It's a little similar to what Joe is saying. Is like this is a new program, and so even DOE kind of working with service providers to inform them what the requirements are, so they can explain them to the building owner, so that they can work with them, has been a lot of work on our end too. Is like trying to work with. There's a lot of really good service providers out there. But this is a new program, and as Joe said, some of it is like just like, you know, things that are kind of in the weeds that we need to explain to the service providers. They can make sure the building owner understands. And so that has been a challenge, I think, too, is the current workforce that is there is making sure that they understand the requirements as well, so that they can best support the building owners. And we're doing as much as we can, but I know that, you know, there could always be more done.
This is Jessica. I echo both Joe and Katie. I think from our perspective, it's new. So trying to get folks like up to speed on, okay, I know I need to do this, but what exactly is it? And even though we do have at least one of our buildings in the retrofit accelerator, it's literally, I was on a call yesterday. Well, who's taking this on from our side? Because it's only, you know, the contractor can only do so much. Like Joe was saying, like we still need to be involved. So who has capacity? But hopefully, because it's new, this gets ironed out, you know, once it becomes a little more, you know, adopted, you know, folks start to get in the swing of things. But yeah.
That's a really good point, Jessica, particularly for buildings that are have lower, you know, lower resources to put, like staff that are already stretched very thin. And as Joe's saying, even buildings where they have a lot of staff, it's still, they are very busy, right? Like this is just another thing.
That's what I was about to offer, is that, I mean, Joe, you and I have talked about this a little bit. I think, you know, if you're struggling with some of the labor hour requirements of doing this at your company and Jessica is at hers, then think of the companies with less. Now that's, I think, a point completely divorced from the conversation we were having about legislation, but I do think I would suggest that maybe it would be beneficial offered to DOE, like for there to be some ongoing conversations between some of the building owners and DOE about sort of where are these pain points and how can we lessen the paperwork burdens? How can we recognize where updating where portfolio manager is a great tool but wasn't quite designed for this, which doesn't mean we shouldn't use it, but it does mean like in some cases something that seems simple is actually not simple to update. And so yeah, how can we reduce some of these requirements in order to sort of help the building, help more folks who are even more stretched thin be able to do this.
Marshall, I think that's an amazing point. Is like if we're like, what are some conditions and challenges to put to this list, right? It's just like I think we used to get guidance from Energy Star. It was like, hey, if this or that's changing by less than 10%, don't worry about making the update. It's good enough, right? That used to kind of be like the rule of thumb. And now it's just like, I've got 1 square foot change. I'm going back 6 years, before we even owned the building. It's really hard, right? So it's just like having some margin for, good enough, right? Like we are, so that, because I swear to God, I've like the amount of time that I spent on energy efficiency projects this year compared to compliance, it's 1 to 99 in hours, and so if we should, as the makers of the rules here, like really be trying hard to make the compliance effort lessen so people can focus on saving energy. And so, if we could build in some margins, it's like, this is within 10%, good enough. So, people can focus on saving energy instead of focus on compliance. And I think one other kind of condition and challenge that we want to add a bullet point here, reducing carbon emissions. This is for the common benefit, right? This isn't just for the benefit of the building owners or the tenants. It's for the benefit of the city. It's for the benefit of the world, right? For the benefit of the planet. I think access to funding and financing. Yeah, like access to free funding and financing, right? Where it's the money in these funds is going to pay for these projects, for Class A buildings, Class B buildings, Class C buildings, for all the everybody benefits from this. And if you want to unlock, those resources or create them, I think that would be a real, condition and challenge that we need to address.
I agree, Joe. I'm on board. We need the money so we can hand it out. Okay, let's move on to one very specific. Oh, and I also want to point out that Set from AOBA did put a comment in the chat that AOBA has suggested a penalty waiver for good faith compliance, and the good faith waiver would apply for the initial compliance period only. So I just want to point that out, that was in the chat. So moving on, one point that I know Joe has a lot of opinions of, because we've had great conversations about it. And one thing that maybe needs some tweaks, but what I told Joe is I promised him we'd bring it from the task force and we'll talk about it. So third-party verification. So I'm just going to give some context so everybody's on the same page about how we arrived where we did with third-party verification. So as a reminder, the Clean Energy DC Omnibus bill that created the BEPS program also created a third-party verification requirement. And it literally, that's what was in the law. There needs to be a third-party verification every 3 years. That was the basis of, that was extensive what was in the legislation, right? And I also want to remind everybody that legislation always trumps regulations. So you can never do anything in regulation that is not, you don't have the authority to do in legislation, okay? So it's just that context. So basically, once that's legislation was there, we published regulations for public comments. These can be found in 20 DCMR 3513 to 3516. So those are basically our benchmarking regulations. Those are the regulations that oversee the benchmarking program, as you all know it. Those were published on December 4th, 2020. The proposed language that was in there related to third-party verification that we're going to focus on today is 3515.6, which stated an approved district data verifier shall not be an employee of the building owner or of the building owner's designee who prepares or submits the benchmarking information and portfolio manager. You know, the next slide, Ike. So again, we put out regulations and we get public comments. DOE has to, we are required to consider all comments that we get. We can't consider one comment more than another one. We have to consider all comments. We didn't receive a ton of comments on the benchmarking regs, but the majority of them were focused on third-party verification. We received public comments from 3 separate commenters. Here's some of the comments we received and the updates we made. One commenter updated that we make it clear that the building owner and the owner designee are not allowed to perform data verification. So someone felt that that language wasn't clear enough. So we did update the language to reflect that. One commenter recommended adding further restrictions to who is prohibited from performing data verification. We did not make that change. We did not feel that it aligned with the intent of the program. One commenter recommended adding the issuing state or organization as part of the submission requirements for data verifiers. We made that update. And then a commenter recommended amending one of the sections to state that an approved data verifier must not have been previously banned by DOE to do data verifications. We did not make changes because we don't have the authority to enforce on the data verifier. We can only enforce on the building owner. So next slide. Other comment that we received, someone recommended removing the restriction that we talked about, which is that the employee of the building owner or the building owner's designee to conduct third-party verification. So this is the one that we're going to kind of focus on today. We did not make that change because as we put in the response in our public comment, third party is by definition independent of the building owner, and therefore the department defines third party as precluding the building owner or the building owner's designee. So if you read our benchmarking rules, it says that the building owner or the building owner's designee does the benchmarking. And so in our mind, and this was again agreed upon from the Office of the Attorney General, is that third party is somebody who is separate from both of those entities. You can go back to the next slide. So the final rulemaking was published on October 22nd, 2021. 3515.6 was updated. The only thing that we did is we kind of broke it out a little bit more so that it was clearer, as one commenter suggested, that an approved district data verifier shall not be A, the building owner or an employee of the building owner, or B, the building owner's designee or an employee of that designee who prepares or submits benchmarking information. So we've received feedback that this restriction that's bolded here is not in line with what EPA does through their certification program, and that it has made it burdensome on building owners. So what that means is that if I have a consultant doing my benchmarking, I then can't have another employee at that consulting firm then do the third-party verification. EPA allows this through their certification program. We do not allow it through our third-party verification regulatory requirements because, again, we're stating that that's not a third party. And so I had some good conversations with other folks, and then Joe and I had a really good conversation about this, and I kind of told him we'd bring it in front of the task force and maybe talk about it again. I do want to state that our hands are a little bit tied right now because this would have to, as I talked to our general counsel's office, this would probably have to be a legislative change. We'd have to define it a little bit differently in the legislation in order to allow this. But I told Joe I'd bring it in front of the group and we could talk about it again. So if anybody has opinions or thoughts.
I would love to speak to why I feel so strongly that it's a significant challenge to the industry. If you don't mind, is that cool? Awesome, thank you. Thank you so much for putting this on the agenda. For sure, when the benchmarking reg came out, it was around the same time as some of these other regs, we were working on them. And it was just like, oh, third-party verification, skip. I know what that is, right? Like, and it means something in our industry, right? Like we've been getting Energy Star awards, and hanging them on the wall since 1999. Like it's a term that people thought they knew what it meant. When I talked to Con Service and I talked to UL Verification Services and told them, like, hey, do you know DOE's got this interpretation? It's like, you're like, what are you talking about, right? Like, no, like nobody knew this was what those words meant, right? That I believe that honestly, right? And what I would, this kind of goes back where we're just talking about, like, hey, like let's make the rules so they don't deteriorate from like the effort of saving energy, right? Like this this, in my humble perspective, represents something that's wholly duplicative, right? Like, we're already hiring a company to do benchmarking, right? Why do we need to hire somebody else to verify it, right? There's a lot of kind of information trading that is going to tie up your building manager engineering teams who are supposed to be like trying to save some energy. Instead, they're spending more time and money on compliance. You know, you could kind of just double it, right? And the part that really I think drives this point home for me is that it doesn't get you anything better, right? Like the same outfits that have these, you know, verification houses, they're already separate people from the people that do the benchmarking. They're already different. There's already firewalls set up. They're not like getting commissions based on how fast they verify. You know, they've got their PE stamp on the line, which they really value. So I find it wholly duplicative with no benefit. And you know, and so it's just like I think it's actually adverse to the mission of what BEPS and DOE is trying to accomplish here. By you know and I expect the Office of Attorney General has not done a ton of like Energy Star award applications, and so the third party verification. We're talking about a third party removed from the owner, right? Not a third party removed from the bench. They're just applying like third party from whom to the wrong like entity. That's it.
Can I see this kind of popping up in the chat, and it kind of gets to what Joe is saying. So the explicit language that is in the legislation. So this is under DC Official Code 6-1451.03. For anybody who's a lawyer understands what that means. And then it's under section C to F. Basically says that every 3 years, the owner or the owner's designee shall perform a third-party verification. So it states in the legislation, the owner or the owner's designee shall perform the third-party verification. And so that was interpreted to be that it needs to be a third party from those entities.
Can we define designee? Is that like a vendor, or I'm just a little confused by that word, like what it encompasses?
The way that we've interpreted it to be is that is someone that the building owner has designated to do the benchmarking for them.
So and just trying to understand Joe's perspective, if you have like one vendor benchmarking every year for you, you're paying to benchmark, do we need a separate contract with a separate vendor to then go and do that benchmarking over again?
They don't do the benchmarking. They verify that the benchmarking was done correctly. So they go in and make sure that whoever did it correctly. So they don't have to redo the benchmarking. They just have to check the data and ensure that the documentation matches. So if you say your building is 150,000 square feet, the verifier is going to make sure that you have the documentation to back that up.
Right.
They're going to sign off on it.
Change it. They can't make any changes in the profile either, right? They only verifying. They can't touch the profile. That's the way the rule is working right now.
So, yeah, you're like, here are the building drawings, and this is where it says the building is 150,000 square feet. Yeah.
Annika, did you want to speak to this? Your hand was up, and then I had a comment as well.
So there's precedent of third party in our energy code, and when we define what a third party is for commissioning, the energy code in DC says it's not someone on the design team. LEED also has third party commissioning, and it used to be it couldn't be the same firm that provided design services, but they eventually broadened that to be it could be the same firm, but not somebody on the design team. LEED has always allowed the owner to commission its own projects. If the owner had commissioning resources on staff, like a university. In fact, I've worked with many clients at universities or healthcare systems that do have commissioning personnel on staff. it's not clear to me what value we get out of this. If there's concern about conflict of interest, this is the owner hiring one consultant and then hiring another consultant who both report back to the owner. And so it isn't, you know, so if you have a benchmarking professional who comes in and enters the data and the owner has someone else who's a registered engineer who goes in and validates that data, to me, that is a third party validating data they did not touch, they did not enter, but this process has existed for a long time with Energy Star certifications for buildings, with LEED certifications and with our energy code, that there are some checks and balances. And I've seen within that, sometimes people validate the data and don't always get it right, don't notice some anomalies and things like that, not intentional anomalies, but unintentional discrepancies. Even with multiple parties looking at it, but I just think that there's no value in my mind to having the owner hire a second consultant to validate what their first consultant did. Now, obviously, the owner could submit their own data and hire a first consultant to validate it. But this is, if owners have a lot of buildings, they may not have the bandwidth to do all of that benchmarking and BEPS compliance, unilaterally. So I just feel like this is an area where the interpretations, it is an interpretation. There could be some room to still maintain stringency, but not deviate so significantly from what other programs are doing.
The place, Katie, I see your hand up. Do you mind if I go first, or do you want to respond?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, the place where I think that this gets tricky, to my mind, is, so I'll make two comments. First, I think as someone who is involved, as were others on this call in the writing legislation, sort of designee was sort of written as synonymous for sort of agent. So like a case where the building owner isn't really involved at all and they've hired a management company and the management company is handling it. I don't know that the designee was meant to include the people who did the benchmarking if it was a different consultant. So it may be that, but that, I mean, it's what the law says. So it may be there's an intent in what it actually ends up saying may differ. But I think the place to my mind where this differs, Joe, I was really glad you made the point about Energy Star certification, because Energy Star certifications have to be signed off on by PEs or RAs, professional engineers or registered architects. Those are both fields where there are codes of practice that govern things, ethical walls or screens, or what some people used to call Chinese walls, which is a bad term for a lot of reasons. Those you can do that. You can have, and engineers I've worked with, where one team does the design, a different team does the verification. It's the same company, but there's a screen between them. And that's fine. But the DOE also allows CEMs, certified energy managers, to do it, and there's an ASHRAE certification as well that I believe can verify. I'm blanking on the name of which one right now. And I actually personally think, like, from just a data quality standpoint, that's great, because I know many CEMs who know energy way better than many PEs. That said, those certifications are not professional licenses. They don't have the same degree of scrutiny. They don't have the same professional consequences if it's revoked. They don't have the same terms governing ethical screens. So I personally, I'm a very sympathetic person. I'll just say where you're coming from, but I do worry about sort of just saying, okay, we'll do it the same way, and allow the same company to do it the way Energy Star does, but at the same time continuing to allow CEMs and ASHRAE certified people to do the verification. I think we might need to, I think that would be, to my mind, a potential consequence of tightening the, loosening who can do it might also require tightening what sort of certifications can sign off on it. I don't actually know that that trade-off is a value add for what it's worth.
So I'm gonna just speak up because my point is very similar to Marshall's. We are not no, we are not fully aligned with Energy Star certification requirements. DOE, so I feel like if we're going to revisit this topic, then we should revisit it fully, in my opinion. So we don't require a site visit. We allow other certifications, credentials than EPA does, and we don't require indoor air quality testing, which is required on the data verification checklist. So we did those things because we were trying to cut down on costs for building owners. You don't have to do a site visit. You can do it electronically. You could hire someone in Chicago to do your data verification. It would help with the workforce development piece of it. Not having enough workforce. is what I'm trying to say. Again, we allow more credentials than just PE or RA because we wanted to, again, allow for a more expansive workforce to be able to help with this, as well as cut down on costs. And then we don't require the indoor air quality testing piece of it. If we're going to revisit, then I want to revisit this fully. And I agree with Marshall that if we are going to allow for there to be less restrictions on who a third party is, then I would, as DOE, I would recommend that we then restrict the credentials that are allowed to sign off on this, because again, a PE license comes with a lot more ability for DOE to report that somewhere than maybe a CEM or a BEAP. So I agree. And I think if we're going to revisit this, and I'm happy that if we want to continue this conversation, or if we want to take a vote or something today, on whether we should revisit this or we should change it. But I just wanted to put it out there that DOE, from DOE's opinion, I think we should revisit it fully. And we should revisit, if we want to align with EPA, then we should align with EPA, and then we'd have to throw in those requirements as well.
Yeah, it sounds like this is for I agree with, and maybe a merits a larger conversation. It does seem like, I'm just looking at it from the DGS perspective. If you have two vendors, there still is a conflict of interest with both potentially, because you're paying both. DGS is paying both. They're reporting to you. It'd be different if it was you like the building owner pay like one entity that's certified to do this, that's been given the authority by DOE, and then they're truly independent. I guess the problem is that the vendors are not truly independent from the building owner, and it seems like that's what this is trying to achieve, some sort of reduction in conflict of interest, but I'm not sure if it'll actually do that.
Thanks, Jen. I appreciate it. We appreciate all the feedback. Again, this is the first time we're doing it. So I see Seth has made a comment, doesn't our penal authorization sufficient to deter inaccurate or sloppy benchmarking submissions? Yes, but that would require us catching it, Seth, and DOE doesn't have a data verifier is digging into the data way deeper than DOE is, and we are going to audit as many as we can, but we are not digging into every single of the 3,000 buildings, and that's what this data verification piece is supposed to catch. So we just see the data as is, and I want to remind everyone that BEPS penalties are based on gross floor area that is reported to DOE. So if that data is not accurate, we could get to a point where the building owner's telling us that their penalties aren't accurate, and then trying to fight us on that, rather than, as you stated, trying to get to that energy reduction. So I will let you all know that we have lots of building owners that are approaching us proactively and trying to change their data. We got, I think, 140 tickets or something in the 2 weeks leading up to the deadline, because building owners or their representatives have realized that they've been reporting their data incorrectly to us for the last 5 years, or the last 6 years, or the last 10 years. And they're the ones initiating the change, not the OEE. And so if they're coming to us and telling us, think about if you went to the IRS and said, I've been reporting my taxes wrong for the last 10 years. They're going to kind of scrutinize that a little bit. So we have to have some standards. Again, EPA is a voluntary program. Ours is a regulatory program. There are penalties based on this. There are people's success in terms of getting penalties based on this. So we are trying as best as we can to get the data as accurate as possible. But I do understand that there's some nuances and there's some paperwork issues that maybe we do need to work out. And I'm open to all of that. But I just want to say that, as Scott mentioned in the comments, the stakes are higher. So if you all, I think if we revisit it and the task force all feels like we should take this requirement out, I'm open to it. But I want to say that, again, there are building owners who have had consultants doing their benchmarking for the last 10 years wrong. And they haven't had any third party to tell them that it was wrong. So we've seen lots of examples of that.
Just point out that I don't think we want to be coming to the DC Council with individual onesie-twosie legislative recommendations. I think it would be good for the BEPS task force to try and develop a comprehensive set of recommendations, including related to building, the third-party verification piece. Also, I think there's agreement on the task force that we should change the word penalties to payments. And then there's the BEPS task force, the DOE greenhouse gas study recommendations. I think we could package those, and I think there's probably some other important changes that we could reach agreement on and send them over to the council as a package. And hopefully it would be consensus package and it would sail through the council.
I agree. And that you all are great at dovetailing into next conversations today. Annika, by the way, it's based on the reported gross floor area because unfortunately the tax data is often wrong.
But
we have learned
always
this
wrong.
We've learned this throughout the history of our program. So it is based on the reported floor area. Okay, so on that note, so building out all this context, we know there's challenges facing the building industry. We know that there have been fixes recommended in the past with the task force that we weren't able to do at the time because, again, when we were writing the regulations, they required a legislative change. So as Cliff is mentioning, if there's these changes that we think need to be done now to make this program more workable and more easier for the building industry to comply, then I think should think about sort of like what does that look like? So I pulled out a lot of the big ticket items that I know we've discussed in the past. This list is not comprehensive, but here are some of the things that I know we've talked about in the past. One is that we gave we've given that basically a year delay in this first compliance cycle due to COVID. However, the second BEPS cycle starts January 1st, 2027. So there's this awkward thing where we would like to push out that second date to start January 1st, 2028, so that we get the data in April of 2027 for the first cycle, and then we set the next BEPS, what is that, 8 months later, which is how we had built the program to be, right? So that's one. Two, Cliff just mentioned it. I know this was a big one for a lot of you all, was changing alternative compliance penalties to alternative compliance payments, because payments can be passed on to tenants, whereas penalties cannot. So that would be literally changing one word. And I put some legislative citations in here so we know what needs to be changed. Y'all don't necessarily need to know that, but if we do want to make changes, these are the sections that need to be changed. Going to the next slide. Another big one, and this is becoming very relevant, is we talked a lot about what happens when a building is largely vacant, and we talked about this before the pandemic happened. So basically, how do we address issues of high vacancy? Because this happens in buildings all the time, whether there was a pandemic or not, right? And so we created a whole subcommittee, and I believe Marshall and Jen were on that. Jen Croft, I think you were on that subcommittee.
Joe was on it too. Very helpful.
And so the subcommittee recommendations were that we follow, these were the recommendations generally from that. We follow EPA recommendations for occupancy thresholds. So whatever EPA kind of says is the occupancy threshold where you can no longer get a score, essentially, is what we would follow. Exclusion of low to no occupancy buildings from the data set. So any buildings that have really low occupancy, in order to set the BEPS, we kind of take them out of the data set because they're not really representative. And then another big one that came out of the committee that we weren't able to do because it would require legislative change is basically exempting buildings from BEPS completely for that cycle if they have low or no occupancy. If they fell below that threshold for either of the 2 preceding years in the compliance cycle, because that affects your baseline. And then also new buildings should not be covered by BEPS until they reach sufficient occupancy after receiving their C of O. Again, we were not able to allow for these full exemptions because the legislation doesn't allow us to, and so we don't have the authority to put that in regulation. Those are the 3 big ones. You all, I'm going to leave it if you all want to discuss these 3 big ones or you want to add to it, but I think these were the 3 that I remember us talking about a lot.
The other one was the one that Cliff mentioned, the greenhouse gas study, going to a trajectory model over an Energy Star, median Energy Star model for compliance. And I think in the sort of some of the BSA hearings, we got some feedback from some stakeholders that some folks might like moving to that sooner than the 3rd cycle because of the certainty associated with it, just the known endpoint and midpoint and that being helpful to building owners rather than something that escalates and you have these unknown standards and future cycles.
And we discussed that in task force meetings. I think we never took a vote on it, but I recall multiple task force members thinking that that should take effect starting in the second cycle, which obviously would require a change,
Yeah, and I
a
think
substantial
when it
legislative
was
change.
presented, I think it was presented as possibly third cycle and maybe possibly like voluntary opt-in in second cycle, but it sounds like that there might be folks who might be interested in that happening sooner rather than later. So I think that's another thing I would add to the list for consideration.
Set, could you expand on what you mean by penalties being used to implement compliance?
Am I allowed to speak?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Hi, Set.
Hi. I've been trying to observe the guidelines from last year. You know, in our comments, we had suggested that if a building owner is hit with a penalty for non-compliance, instead of that amount going to the general fund or wherever it goes, maybe the building owner should be permitted to take that what he's being penalized and fix the problem. You know, and to come into compliance. You know, you're going to find somebody, you know, just to pull the number out of the air, $10,000, $100,000, whatever. You know, instead of that going to into a general fund somewhere, which may or may not benefit BEPS at all, that maybe the building owner should be able to say, okay, I've got this penalty. I've got to use this money to remedy the very thing I was penalized for.
My concern with that is that you could have building owners who just skip the first cycle. Like, why make the investment in the first cycle if they could delay the investment and then the penalty they otherwise would pay becomes the investment they then make in the second cycle. So they just basically would get a free first cycle not to do anything.
Well, all that assumes, and you know, and this goes back to the initial my initial comment. All this assumes good faith. You know, if you you know, I think even certainly I would agree that if you got somebody who's just sitting on their hands and gaming the system, no. But if you got a building owner who's really trying, who really tried, can show that, you know, he or she made the investments and for whatever reason they were out of compliance and they're going to be penalized, then and they could show that in good faith that they made the investments, they tried, they hired the contractors, the consultants, and here they are going to be socked with this penalty in addition to having to fix the problem anyway. You know, if we're truly concerned about bringing these buildings into compliance with BEPS, it seems to me that, you know, one way to do that is to allow that building owner to take that penalty and fix the very thing that led to the penalty. Again, this assumes good faith efforts.
Cliff?
Thanks for explaining, Set.
I share Annika's concern. I mean, I think the reality is that it's costly for DOEE to collect payments, whatever we call it. It's very labor intensive, and that's wasted money. We don't want DOEE to be in the position of having to go out through that process and collecting, and ultimately it's wasting everyone's money. So we want there to be a deterrence. We want for building owners to comply rather than to just not comply and have their potential payments escrowed, and then they can apply it to their ability. That's not much of a deterrent.
You're assuming bad faith on the part of building owners. I think your own discussion, if anything, has highlighted the fact that building owners are really trying to make this work. You know, they are doing what is necessary to come into compliance. You know, and you know, if there are 2 or 3 building owners who are going to game the system, well, shame on them. But you know, I think at least in this discussion, you know, the takeaway I have is that building owners are complying with BEPS, or they're doing their best to meet all the requirements. And if you have a building owner who does that, who, notwithstanding his best efforts or her best efforts, falls short, you know, not only is he or she going to have to pay a penalty, but they're going to have to invest even more money to fix what led to the penalty in the first place. So it's almost a double penalty for this building owner.
Well, the solution, of course, is for the building owner to fix it and never incur a payment.
Agreed.
Hold on, let me finish, please.
Sure, I'm sorry.
I do think that DOEE should have some flexibility. And I think they probably do have some flexibility to
Careful.
reduce payment requirements and that sort of thing for building owners that are operating in good faith. And I think that DOE has shown that they're very accommodating, and I support that. Beyond that, to the extent that there are payments, I would love to see those payments applied to help, say, affordable housing, buildings serving frontline communities to make improvements and comply with BEPS. So it's not going to the general fund, it's still making buildings better and accomplishing the goals of BEPS, but it's targeted at those buildings that can least afford to make improvements. And therefore it's providing a strong signal to the building owners that they should improve in the first place, rather than just waiting for DOE to force them to escrow some money that they'll invest back in their own building.
And we can have that discussion. I was just responding to Katie's request for possible legislative fixes. I mean, that's certainly worthy of discussion. But it's my understanding that under the current legislation, any penalty would go to a general fund somewhere.
It goes
to
into the
the
SCTF.
It goes to the Sustainable Energy Trust Fund, which does have requirements on how that money can be spent. So that's where the money goes. But your point is well taken, Seth.
If I could just put my co-chair hat on for a second, and suggest that I think the takeaway that I'm having listening to this conversation is that there's a lot to discuss here, and we could probably take the next half hour and several hours more. And knowing that DOE has a whole nother topic, I'm wondering if folks would be okay with us tabling this discussion and trying to get through the additional topic that DOE, that is somewhat time sensitive, that DOE wanted some feedback from the task force on, and then we can come back to this as time allows or in our next meeting.
Thank you, Marshall. Okay.
I don't hear any objections, so.
No objections. I just want to say your points are all well taken. We've tried our best to listen to all points of view and we want this to be workable for the industry. It doesn't work if it doesn't work for y'all. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is a very specific kind of issue, but it does affect lots of buildings, and I imagine there might be more out there that just haven't talked to DOE yet. So we've received several requests for either exemptions or custom alternative compliance pathway requests for situations where there's one single building structure that includes completely separate entities that own different parts of the building. I'm going to give you a very specific example, and I'm going to walk through kind of what they requested of DOE and where we've gotten so far. So there are 2 multifamily buildings in City Center, whereby the ground floor retail portion of the building is owned, completely owned, not leased, owned by a separate entity that owns the multifamily portion that is above the retail. So this is one physical structure. There's retail on the bottom, there's multifamily on the top, and there's 2 entities. So there's entity A that owns this part and entity B that owns this part. Because the retail and multifamily are vertically stacked, we have given these buildings guidance in the past that EPA guidance recommends that they benchmark together as one building because they are vertically stacked. I can't remember if they share systems or common areas, but basically we've given them that guidance. They were evaluated as one building under BEPS because they were benchmarking together. The next slide. So for City Center, one owner reached out to DOE requesting a full exemption from BEPS, basically stating neither entity has control over what the other entity does, and so they shouldn't be held to the building energy performance standards requirements. So at this point, what we did, our lawyer who's on the line drafted a letter. So our general counsel drafted a letter back to the building owner and basically just requested more information about the ownership structure so we can get an idea of what that actually looks like. And then encourage the building owner to reach out to DOE to set up a meeting and discuss this further so we can come up for a solution with them, come up with a solution for them. And we're waiting for confirmation of the meeting. In the meantime, I'm soliciting feedback from, I talked to other jurisdictions, 2 other jurisdictions, to kind of ask them how they deal with this issue. And then we are planning to talk to EPA to see if they have any thoughts on this. And then our general counsel had suggested we bring it in front of the task force to talk about. So next slide. So the questions that come to mind for us, this is not comprehensive. We can talk about these, or we can talk about other questions. So should DOE allow these buildings to benchmark different portions of the building separately? So should the retail be allowed to be treated as like a separate building from the multifamily? If yes, that would most likely make at least one portion of the building under 50,000 square feet. So should they still be subject to BEPS separately? And if no, who should be responsible for benchmarking and BEPS, and who can and should DOE hold legally responsible? These are the questions that we have to answer. But there might be other questions that you all want to bring up or that we should talk about. So I'll stop there.
I just wanted.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Marshall.
No, Cliff's hand was up. I'll let him go first.
You had your hand up before I did.
Oh, did I? I forgot. I wanted to just observe that this, similar to vacancy in one particular way, in this particular way, is a place where when, and here I speak as someone, as you all know, before I did everything I do now, I worked at DOE and I helped run the benchmarking from this place where we made one decision with an eye towards benchmarking that I'm not sure applies to BEPS. So we had this obviously is not a new problem. This was a problem with benchmarking. This was a problem that 10 years ago there were buildings in this scenario. Faced with the question of who gives who data to submit some data in a data portal, and it was easy enough to say, oh, just one party gives the other party data and we don't really care which one of you does it, but one of you has to do it. I'm making it sound a little more informal than it is, but that was sort of the essence at the time of sort of how I think DOE looked at the question of multiple owners in a vertically stacked building with benchmarking. BEPS is an entirely different kettle of fish in terms of the legal liability. And just as the vacancy subcommittee found that the sort of very stringent vacancy exemption allowed in benchmarking didn't make sense for BEPS, it may not make sense here either. And just want to sort of offer that context for folks. And Jen has a question that I think is probably germane. Katie, before we go to Cliff's.
I don't know the specific example for this one, Jen, but it varies. So sometimes they share systems and share meters, and sometimes they're completely separate in terms of meters. So I think in this situation, they probably don't, because it's a retail and then there's like a condo building. And then there's another one that's retail and like market rate apartments. I'd have to go back and look. Again, we reached out to the building owner to say, can you explain to us a little bit more what's going on in the building? We haven't heard back. So I don't know specifically for this example, but we've seen both examples. And I want to remind everybody that we even have physically different buildings that are physically different structures that are benchmarking together because they share a meter or they share a system. So that is happening too. And that is a similar situation. Like a lot of times it's like a garden style multifamily complex that makes sense because it's like one owner, but we do have a very messy, one example of a very messy, Marshall knows what I'm talking about because we've dealt with them for years, where it's like condo building, theater, office, but they all share some sort of meter and they have to benchmark together. So this expands past just there being a vertically stacked building. It also talks about buildings that like share a meter that are like one building and have separate ownership entities.
Okay, yeah, it seems like number one would be a lot, well, the yes bullet would be a lot easier if they're completely separate electric and natural gas meters.
Yeah, the only other tricky issue is if they have any common spaces that they share, which can also happen. But I agree, Jen, the meter configuration is definitely a consideration.
Yeah, I agree. Meter and system configuration is really key. I think the IMT model BEPS law has sort of a thoughtful consideration of how you define a building, and meters and systems are a big part of that. Obviously, we have lots of condominiums in the district that have separate owners, often with separate systems and separate meters, and yet are required to benchmark and to comply with BEPS as a single building. And this situation shouldn't be all that unique. I mean, unique to BEPS, that is, the buildings all have to pay taxes, property taxes. They all have to pay for their utilities. They have to have some mechanism for allocating those costs among the various occupants of the building. So presumably those are probably written up in some sort of an agreement between the owners or the tenants. Presumably those same provisions could be applied for allocating responsibilities, including responsibilities to make any alternative compliance payments. So I would think that use that as a guide going forward, and not treat these radically different than we treat, say, residential condominiums, but recognize that it is messy and there has to be a certain amount of flexibility to make this work for folks. And I think that DOE is probably doing a really good job of having open lines of communication. But this is somewhat transitional. I would expect that going forward, anybody selling condominiums or, you know, writing leases is going to consider this and write that into the relevant provisions. But it is going to be an issue until all of those leases and agreements are rolled over.
Yeah. Thank you, Cliff. And Scott Emery brings up a good point too, that sometimes they share one main building condenser loop. And so that's another situation we've seen. So then there's a condenser loop that's serving both portions of the building, and per EPA guidance, they're supposed to be benchmarked together. So again, that's another factor for us to consider. And then again, the point I was making is if we do treat these separately and one of them, they then fall under 50,000, can they be exempt from BEPS completely? You know, that's a question that's what we were asked to do, is to treat them separately and then not subject them to BEPS.
So I would like to just, for both of the reasons you just stated and Cliff just stated, my position would be not to allow them to benchmark separately. I don't think that meets the intent of Clean Energy DC. This is a large building. It was intended to be benchmarked and intended to be picked up in BEPS. And if we start allowing buildings to divide up by owner and cut themselves up into smaller pieces so that they fall below certain thresholds, then large buildings wouldn't fall under any of these policies. They could just basically fall under different ownership structures. I think that would be, this would be a problematic precedent to set. We, as Cliff pointed out, have a lot of condominium buildings, many of which may not yet, or may have just started benchmarking and may not yet be included in BEPS, but will be soon. And so this precedent will matter. I think whether it's a property management company or an HOA or whatever legal structure does address commonalities with the property, I don't, you know, assuming they're separately metered. If they're not, then they just have to prorate sort of everything by square footage. But assuming they have separate meters, it should be pretty easy to tell if neither property type is meeting BEPS based on its use type, or if one is and one isn't, and they can sort out amongst themselves how they want to address compliance or non-compliance. But that, I don't know that DOE needs to adjudicate that. To me, that seems like an issue for building or property owners to address with their own consumption and building performance.
Yeah, I will state that one small difference between a residential condominium is that there is usually a governing body of that building. With this type of building, there, as far as we know, there's no one governing body over that one structure. There's two separate entities that are very separate from each other. So that is the struggle on our end, is like, what do we do legally and how can we accommodate that structure?
There's no legal entity that governs the whole thing.
My guess is there's some agreement where, like, trash pickup, parking that serves both, landscaping, site maintenance, pest maintenance, some legal agreement between the two owners in this case or in similar cases, you know, agree to work with each other to address common amenities, common services, common challenges with the building.
Sorry, I should clarify. That's what the building owner told us. So that's what I shouldn't say the building owner, the letter writer that sent this to us, who was one of the entities, said to us. And so we did, like I said, we did go back to them. Our general counsel did go back to them and say, hey, can you clarify that there's no sort of governing body over this building? That, you know, so we did ask that question. We just haven't received a response yet.
It may not be a governing body, but I think there's likely some kind of agreement between the owners for other shared responsibilities. It may not be a governing body, but a contract that exists between them for those shared responsibilities and services.
Okay, thanks. Is there any other thoughts on this? We have about 8 minutes left in the meeting.
Yeah, I would
see if
anybody
else who hasn't spoken up yet. Oh yeah, Adrian.
Yep.
I
actually think you know, that the building should be allowed to benchmark separately. I just feel like, you know, practically it seems a little unfair for, you know, an owner one portion of a building to be making every effort and then the other, you know, not. And then I just think it's really complicated to when you get to look at penalties, I think that would be really problematic. And just looking at Annika's point about, if they fall below a threshold, maybe you could set a rule that it would be, if the total building is 50,000 square feet, then they still have to, benchmark in this cycle, maybe just given the unique circumstance.
Adrian, can I just make sure I understand what you're saying? So they would let's say there's 10,000 of retail and 40,000 of multifamily, just make it very simple. We would hold we would separate that out. Retail would benchmark as 10,000, multifamily would benchmark as 40,000. They would be held to the BEPS separately. So retail would be held to the retail BEPS, multifamily would hold to the multifamily BEPS, and then they would have to reach, if they don't meet the BEPS, they didn't have to reach the 20% site EUI respectively for those separate buildings.
Right. I mean, I think that they're different owners. I think they make different operational decisions. A lot of cases they have different tax lots. They're pretty much separate. I know of a few instances like this.
Okay. Thanks, Adrian, for your perspective. It's important to hear from folks who actually have buildings that might be in this situation. I don't know if WC Smith does, but is there anybody else that has thoughts or opinions on this that we haven't heard from yet?
Yeah, I wonder if they were not allowed to have their own BEPS compliance separate pathways, if one would be incentivized to sell and move somewhere else to a smaller building that wasn't subject to BEPS.
Yeah. It's a thought. Okay. It seems like we've gotten a lot of information here. I think next step again, our general counsel's office is on the line, so we'll talk to them about kind of what next steps are, and then if we do come up with some sort of solution or proposal, and if we hear back from the building owner that changes things, we can bring it back to y'all and kind of report out of what either was decided or if we need more feedback, if that works for you all. This is a helpful conversation though. So next slide, we have 5 minutes. So next meeting, next steps. I'm going to pass this to Annika and Myrtle based on the conversation we had today. Annika and Myrtle had suggested that maybe we want to meet more frequently because there are all these issues popping up, potential changes to the program. So I'm going to hand it off to y'all.
Yep. I'll just say this is when I proposed tabling a critical item, and you all are like, but we don't meet for 6 months. How can you table it to the next meeting? This is what I had in mind, is that maybe we should meet more frequently now that there's stuff that's live.
And I think they're based on the BSA hearings. I think there's appetite in the council to make some changes that are necessary and helpful to the building ownership community. Some of the things we discussed, the penalty versus payment, officially delaying the second BEPS cycle to 2028 to adjust for the BEPS, the COVID delay. Some of those types of issues. I think there's appetite for hearing those out and receiving those recommendations. So we thought it would be helpful for those to be discussed by the task force and that those recommendations to be consolidated and sent over to the council from the task force. So thoughts on next meeting then and what frequency would be helpful to go ahead and hash out those issues, third-party verification, penalties, payments, delay of the second cycle, vacancies, greenhouse gas studies, and potentially even dealing with this kind of condo issue or a separate ownership issue. Is this a 2 weeks schedule like we used to have? Is it a little bit less frequent? Any thoughts? I know you all thought you were
how often. I'm down for meeting as often as the group is willing to meet.
Of course you are.
Yeah. I mean, I would be up for a meeting every couple of weeks, at least till we get through this recommendation to council, and then we can slow it back down again. Some of these seem like they might be more urgently needed changes that the building community would be supportive of.
Yeah, and I'm not not necessarily saying that I am in full support of like pushing this quickly, but for third party verification specifically, the first year that that's due is next April. So that would have to, if we wanted that to, if you all decided that you wanted those to be changed, that would have to happen very, very, very quickly on a legislative calendar or a legislative sort of process. That would have to happen very quickly because that's less than a year from now.
Yeah.
And I don't even know necessarily if it's possible to get it done in less than a year. I'm just being honest.
Right, we'd send our recommendations. There's probably still got to be legal review and all the fun things that happen when you make changes to legislation and regulation. So is every 2 weeks sufficient? Is that about right for the next couple of months at least till we get something? And Katie, when do we need to have something over to council? Do you have a sense of that?
I don't. And I have to talk to our general counsel's office about how this would work because I don't know. I guess it also depends on who's putting forward the amendments, right? So if it's you all going to council and having a council member introduce it, that would be different than the executive branch introducing it. So those are different processes.
Yeah.
Neither of which DOE has a lot of control over, but they are just different processes. So I will take an action item away to talk to our general counsel's office and like front office to talk about that. If we're doing it, like I said, if it's council, you all going to council and having them introduce it, that's a whole nother process that I don't think DOE would be super involved in. Like we could be involved in the discussions, but we wouldn't be involved in like the drafting the amendments or anything like that.
Right.
What it's worth.
Hampton, correct me if I'm wrong.
Marshall.
I was just saying, for what it's worth, I think from a time standpoint, if the priority was to do this quickly, quickly but deliberatively, I think we'd want to have, but some meetings and public engagement. But I think we'd probably want to, instead of like going, I think the faster process would probably be working directly with a council member. And I haven't talked with any council members about this, but Alan seemed, interested during the hearing, directly on like going straight from like recommendations to legislative drafting. Would probably be the most expedient, though I know Cliff has more experience in that area than I do.
I've spoken to council members, Alan and Fruman, and I think they're both interested in sponsoring consensus legislation to improve BEPS. And obviously Alan chairs the committee that would have jurisdiction.
Yeah, and I'm really sorry. I don't 100% know how the council schedule works in terms of introducing amendments and when they go on recess, and I don't have a legislative director right here to provide that to you all.
But do you have a sense of, since you have spoken to council members, do you have a sense of timing when they would anticipate those recommendations from the task force?
We didn't talk about that. I was just briefing them on the program.
No, just Cliff. I didn't know if he.
Cliff. Sorry, I'm sorry, Annika.
It's okay.
I think they're flexible. Obviously, right now they're consumed with budget, so they wouldn't, even if we brought it to them now, they wouldn't look at it for a while. But and they have a recess that is like the latter half of August or most of August and through Labor Day. But aside from that, I think realistically it probably doesn't get passed until late this year or early next year. But it could happen in that time frame.
But we could target working on it over the next couple of months, getting something to them early fall, and hopefully they would have an opportunity to, if they need a hearing or anything else, but have that opportunity for engagement and hopefully passage.
Yeah, I think they would definitely have to have a hearing, I would think, and markup. But yeah, that could get
okay. Any opposition to a 2-week schedule for the next couple months while we work on these issues that we've proposed? And I've got third-party verification, penalty versus payment, officially delaying the second BEPS cycle, the GHG study, and the GHG trajectory approach, the vacancy issue, and potentially this other multiple owners on the same site issue that would be up for discussion.
How long are we thinking each meeting would be?
Well, that's a great question. It could be an hour. If we need it to be less than 2 hours, I know this is a big chunk of everyone's time.
I think, well, just one of many. I think an hour would be ideal.
Okay. So an hour every 2 weeks?
If it's going to be only an hour, I think it would need to be every 2 weeks instead of like once a month, at least.
Agreed. And we could spin off some subcommittees if we need to have more focused discussion on any one of these specific issues.
I think subcommittees doing some heavy lifting on the complicated issues makes a lot of sense.
Okay. All right, well then that puts
Yeah, I
us,
would.
if we look at 2 weeks from today.
That would put us on the 23rd. Looking at the vendor, I don't think we have, recognizing that we're past time. I think we lost Joe. I think we've lost some other people. We don't have a full complement of task force members on the call anymore. So I would, Annika, I don't know. I'm thinking maybe next step would be tentatively saying that, but putting an email out, or maybe a doodle poll to make sure we're getting further buy-in and sign off.
What's tentatively scheduled, say the 23rd, maybe at 2:30 to 3:30. And but we can send that out by email and just ask everyone. But if we're meeting every 2 weeks, if people can't hit that first one, hopefully they can hit the next one in 2 weeks. It might make sense to go ahead and meet even if we don't get everyone yet, because we'll just be really laying out the agenda.
You can also put a call out for comments via email. If people can't attend, they can submit. Annika, I know you've done that before.
Yeah, call for comments via email, and anybody who's like, yeah, I specifically want to be on one of these. If there's a subgroup spinning off, I want to be on that one. That would also
Why
work.
don't we use the next meeting to we could use the next meeting to just sort of plan.
Okay.
And figure out, and that also Katie would give you time to, I know supporting this task force meeting every 2 weeks. Again, we did 2 weeks for 2 hours for like 2+ years was a huge lift for DOE, and I don't know what your staff capacity is. This would be a bit more of a sort of discussion-based thing, so I don't know if it would need the same level of slides, but I want to be respectful of DOE's capacity as well.
Thanks, Marshall. And I want to reiterate that even after the legislation, if it does get passed, we then have to go through the regulatory process again. So we'd have to draft regulations, we'd have to update all our regs. And that, as you all remember, that process took time too. So even if, as Cliff said, it gets introduced, it gets passed end of the year, best case scenario, we then have to draft regulations to be able to implement those changes and implement and enforce them. So I just want to remind everybody of that.
Though, Katie, if I'm correct, legislation trumps regulation. So if something such as, say, the third-party thing was sufficiently clear in the regulation, it could be used for the purpose of determining like compliance enforcement even prior to a reg update being done, I believe.
Yep. But
it's awkward, but possible.
I won't say anything further, but yes, you know how it is getting too prescriptive in legislation.
I know how it is, but I know in a couple cases with benchmarking, we did exactly that. We put something in law and then began running the program based on it, even though
and all BEPS task force meetings are open to the public. We're required to have them open to the public and recorded and posted on our website. So
I think
the only time that we don't do that is when it's like a subcommittee meeting, and even those we report back out to the larger group, so then it is made public. It's not that they're closed meetings, it's just it doesn't have the same level of scrutiny, or like, I shouldn't say scrutiny, but like restrictions.
And we've tended to open those to stakeholders who wanted to join them, people who are focused on universities or focused on commissioning, or, they've been open to attendees stakeholders who had an interest. They just weren't, quite as widely attended because they were very, very nuanced. Okay, so Katie, will you guys send out an invite for the 23rd? And then I think the agenda is really just to lay out the agenda for the next couple months.
Sounds good.
Okay.
The agenda is to determine the agenda. A meeting about a meeting. Government loves that.
I think, well, to decide what we're going to include in our recommendations, what we need to hash out, if there will be some subcommittees or not, and who wants to be on them, and Yeah,
and if I can get more clarity on before then, I'll have an action item that like I'll try to get more clarity on like council's calendar and like how that process would work. Like, again, if it goes through the executive versus council, it's a different process. So
so we'll get our schedule, our timeline, what we think we'll include in our proposal, and our process kind of mapped out at that next meeting, and any subcommittees we think we might need to spin off mapped out at that meeting.
Sounds bueno, and hopefully next time we meet, we'll have even more buildings in compliance that we can report out. We're over time, so I don't know if anybody has announcements they want to give, but
thanks for everybody's active engagement.
I have an announcement, I suppose, though we're way over time, so maybe we should just save it for our next meeting. I have a new job. I now work with Cliff at IMT. That's the announcement.
That's the announcement.
Congratulations again, Marshall.
Thank you.
Happy to have you, Marshall.
Cool.
All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
With that, we'll conclude the meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.